On tonight's edition of the CHGO Cubs Related podcast, the Cubs have been eliminated and a big offseason for Jed Hoyer and company looms. How do the Cubs top 2025 and 2026? Coming up on tonight's edition of the CHGO Cubs Related podcast. This is the CHGO Cubs Related podcast driven by Toyota. Let's go places. Hello, everyone. My name is Corey. I am joined, as always, by Brendan. We are coming to you on Thursday, October 16th. And Brendan, if you're on YouTube or you're listening on your podcast feeds and you're seeing our beautiful faces or listening to our voices, it does unfortunately mean that the Cubs have been eliminated. Otherwise, they would be playing tonight and there would have been a live watch along on this channel.
You know, we've had about 5 days to recover from this. The first week's always the toughest. You're used to watching baseball day in, day out, downloading all those graphs, right? Looking at Baseball Savant, and all of a sudden it just comes to a grinding halt, and then back to hate watching we go.
Yes. Yeah, a tough hate watch for you and I in this particular NLCS. Really not a lot of good options, but certainly one option is worse than the other.
Right.
Yeah, so a lot to talk about. The season is over. In this episode, obviously, Jed Hoyer spoke to the media this week, yesterday, so we'll be able to talk a little bit of that. We will look back at what happened in 2025, talk a little bit. I know we're a bit removed now, but, would like to offer our thoughts on the NLDS exit against the Brewers. But I think pairing all of that and kind of centering it all on, a couple weeks now from the World Series ending and the offseason beginning anew, and we turn it all over and do it all again, Brendan. So plenty to talk about. I think the first thing I want to do is just, immediately react to the season ending and getting eliminated and all of that. That was a tough one. That was a tough game on Saturday. Certainly, and Jed Hoyer spoke about this in his press conference, and you see it in a lot of these games. It's very tough to hit in the playoffs. You're often facing really good pitching, and other teams felt that for the most part against the Cubs. Outside of those two games, to begin the series in Milwaukee, the Cubs really didn't give up any runs. I don't think they gave up more than 3 runs in any of those other games, certainly not at Wrigley Field. At the same time, obviously extremely frustrating for your season to end with a 1-run performance coming off of a relatively early home run off the bat of Seiya Suzuki and then nothing. Not that I would have felt any better if we were sitting here and they had lost 6-5, right? Like, it's all the same. The outcome is the same, but it does feel a little helpless as you're watching it, sort of veer off the tracks a bit. So certainly disappointing. But as we said, going into that game, the Cubs pushed this about as far as I think you could have reasonably asked, given the state of things by the end of this season. I think once you lose Cade Horton, obviously you lose Justin Steele a long time earlier. You're kind of seeing some of these pitchers running on fumes. Kyle Tucker playing through, whichever injury was bothering him this time and not, fully at his peak self. Kind of felt like, all right, if they can take this one with the Brewers, great, we'll keep going. But it does feel like at some point asking Brad Keller to put out a fire every, other night, maybe was not going to last for two more rounds. So
like I said, the first week's always the toughest. You start thinking about the what ifs.
Sure.
What if Cade Horton did not get injured? Going even further back, what if Justin Steele was healthy? Then you're talking about pretty formidable pitching staff that can go multiple innings. So you start to spiral a little bit, but as we're more removed now, I'm thinking, okay, the foundational pieces exceeded my expectations. We're going to get into it, but Pete Crow-Armstrong, Michael Busch, Cade Horton, the bullpen development, including one guy in particular, Daniel Palencia, who will be on the roster, hopefully for multiple years to come healthy. It was a productive year, but it still just doesn't take away that disappointment. I woke up Saturday morning, I felt the most, I don't want to say like nervous, because it was it was an excited nervous. And it was similar to game 3 of the wild card, but it was different because you have Milwaukee, it's game 5. That's the most excited I've been since 2017, the game 5 NLDS of that. It reminded me, I still got it. 10 years goes by.
Yeah.
Damn right, I still got it.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, certainly, like, I, definitely had the attitude of like, just win one, right? Like, one in my lifetime. We were always chasing that. Saturday and, game 3 with the Padres too was always a good reminder. Like, deep down, you don't really believe that. You know
No,
what I
I don't
mean?
really
Like,
believe it. But
yeah.
if I'm being frank, that doom, that looming doom, you alluded to it last episode before game 5. That looming doom,
It's different.
It is different. Like
Yeah.
you still take these losses more difficult, and you and I are older than we were, 10, 15, 20 years ago, obviously, right? But the way we
I've
react
actually
to it,
gotten younger, but
you gotten younger? Well, you look younger. I think I've aged, you've gotten younger. But like the way we react to this because of that World Series, it's like a good example of what we're watching right now. Okay. Milwaukee's down 0-3 to LA. It looks like it's
what a shame.
bad.
Isn't that a shame, Brendan?
Looks very bad for them, right? But even who they're playing, the Dodgers, they've had so much success over the past 12 years, and they only have one regular season ring. It's really hard, hard to make this, a championship season year in, year out. And we got ours, and I will never forget that, Corey.
Yeah, I think it's, it's always tough to, I think, express how you feel, I think, on some of these things, because I certainly, and I fall into this a lot of the time, like, it's very easy to judge a baseball season in a binary way. Like, it's either successful because they won the World Series, or it is not because they did not win the World Series.
And I'm still working on that.
That's what I'm saying. It's like I vacillate between that. Like, I do feel that, but also, like, this was a really fun season. Like, you guys know, if you've listened to us for any amount of time, or hopefully you can at least just pick it up within a few minutes. Like, you guys know, Brendan and I are not sitting here like, I hope they win the wild card, and if they just win a couple playoff games, like, that's enough for me. Like, and I can, like, of course not, right? Like, we want to see them win a championship. We want them to be the best team in the league and dominate and win it and win championship after championship. Like, that's always the goal. But it did, to me, feel like this was a good and successful season. Could it have been better? Could they have done things differently? Like, certainly, right? Like, you can always play those what ifs. And, Jed even alluded to that in the press conference, not so much about the trade deadline, but about the offseason. But I do think, like, the goal is always to win championships. That's what you're in this to do. But after such a decent drought of not even playing playoff games, not even being in that conversation, they pushed it far. They lost a 2-run game on the road to the number 1 seed in baseball. There's worse things, right? Like, it's baseball, man. Like, sometimes that's how it plays out, and it's okay. The one thing I will say, though, Brendan, and I don't expect Jed to give this language. I don't really expect anybody in the organization to necessarily give this language. But I do hope that what we saw on Saturday is somewhat of a, like, call it a last straw, or sort of a tipping point. Like, that as an organization can't be acceptable to you, right? You lost the division, you lose in the division series to the Brewers, a team that has really run your division for the last 10 years, Basically, it's the second time that they have played a part either directly or indirectly in knocking you out of the playoffs. And they're, for whatever everybody thinks about it, you can guess what I think about it, right? But afterward, they're parading around with a flag to taunt you. That's got to be unacceptable. That has got to be something in this front office. And I don't mean to suggest that like they need to go spend $500 million this offseason, right? Like nothing, but just as an attitude, like this is done. Come 2026, like this division must run through us, and we cannot have these guys literally parading around in front of our faces. As a group, as an organization, that's got to be a point of like, no
Yeah.
more. No
I mean,
more.
I hear you. Sometimes when I hear sentiment like that, I understand it. But if I were to push back on that,
Sure.
if you look at how the Cubs performed this year, we'll get into it, but they overperformed because of that relentless work ethic by some of those players and by a lot of those coaches and by a lot of like young executives and analysts who are really like grinding,
Yeah.
right? So I do think there's a way to talk about the standard, but at the same time, I do believe there's a lot of people in this organization that do acknowledge what that standard is,
100%.
and
Yeah.
they're pouring their sweat and
It's
tears into
yeah.
this.
And I believe that. It's more just a
Yeah,
motivational sense, not
for sure,
necessarily something that like I don't think they felt differently prior to
for
that,
sure.
but it's like just even as a motive, like, all right, enough. You know what
Yeah,
I mean? Like this is it. This is
yeah,
it.
and
Yeah.
I think there's some tone too where when we went through the World Series era, Theo Epstein was a wordsmith. He talked to the media, told stories. He was personable. He was charismatic. You do see a shift in how the front office communicates with fans these days. Ownership is not the best at it. There's been misinterpretations or downright
That's
maybe
being generous.
too
Yeah.
much
Yeah.
transparency, right? But there's not that flow where we're accustomed to feeling good about the team, that they're on the same page as the fans that Theo did provide. But I think that's just more of like a communication
Yeah.
problem that they just don't have.
Yeah. Well, and we've always said this too. Like, Jed as president, doesn't have a World Series title, you know. Um, like Craig Counsell doesn't have as a manager a World Series title. Like a lot of these players don't, a lot of these other executives do not. Like, so everybody should be equally hungry for this. That's always one of those, like, do they want it bad enough? They want to just operate on the margins and be an 80-win team. Like, not really. Maybe Tom, doesn't think of things in some of those ways, but everybody in the organization is definitely trying to win and doing everything they can to be the best at this. So before we hit our first ad break here, I mean, and look, like there's a lot of ways to relitigate the season and things like that.
We got 5
Um,
months to do it.
yeah, but just like wrapping up, and then when we come back, we'll continue to look back at 2025, kind of talk about what Jed said and look ahead to 2026. But just wrapping up, like literally in the playoffs, like was there anything in the way it played out that like particularly bothered you and I don't want to say that like, just like I said, losing 3-1 on the road to the number one team, like I don't want to just write it off as like, oh, well, baseball happens. But like, did you have any strong feelings like ultimately on Sunday, the next day when it was all said and over, deep regrets or anything like that? Or did you kind of just feel like, man, they just came up a little short?
I wouldn't say I have deep regrets. I wouldn't say there are obvious changes that need to occur. I wouldn't even say the decisions they did make were wrong. I I do think there's some introspection on how you manage Michael Busch against left-handed pitching. I think there's introspection that will have to be required this offseason. I don't in a vacuum, and no offense to Colin Ray, I don't in a vacuum like that in an elimination game, he's facing the Brewers top and middle of the order, which then proceeded to have become a home run by Andrew Vaughn. I don't like the the wishy-washiness with Shota. I don't know what to make of that. I don't know why he had such a poor second half. His stuff did look different. We can get into that, I'm sure, this offseason. There's going to be a lot of talk about the contract negotiations and the opt-ins and the opt-outs, all that stuff, right? But I don't like how Shota got to that point. Clearly, there was a fundamental process that was not clicking. And so for your previous 2024 call him ace, if you will, and Council did actually refer to Shota as an ace at one point, to be deferred in favor of your $5 million pitcher who's pitching in an elimination game, giving up home runs that ultimately was the difference. That doesn't sit right with me. And I hope that that process, which it's going to, get revisited, I hope that process does improve going forward.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, fair enough. Yeah. I mean, I hear all that. I mean, yeah, there was definitely stuff, I think, within the series, within the games that, were easy to react to and stuff. But yeah, ultimately, like, it's not to suggest that I was content with them losing or I thought they were going to lose, but it did just sort of feel like I'm not
No
positive.
starting pitchers.
Yeah. Like, I'm not positive what else I can ask of this group. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like, and
I
if
mean,
they get
Brad
through it,
Keller's fading. Palencia was injured.
we'll see if they can survive another round. But it did sort of feel like, all right, like they have pushed this pretty far. Let's see if they can keep it going, and they couldn't.
Okay.
Ultimately the Brewers got over on them again, and that's the bookend to this particular chapter of the Chicago Cubs. But let's take our first ad break here, and then we'll keep talking about 2025 and get to looking ahead to the offseason.
Hey, Cubs fans, Toyota has 25 vehicles with available all-wheel drive and four-wheel drive. The RAV4 has legendary versatility. The Grand Highlander's adult-size third row is for real, and the Tacoma's wild side comes standard. From job size to camp size and game nights, there's an all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive Toyota to get you there in style. Find yours at toyota.com or visit your Chicagoland Toyota dealer today. Toyota, let's go places and become a CHGO diehard and upgrade your fandom today. Get access to our exclusive written content, a free t-shirt, plenty of discounts on future merch and events, plus access to our CHGO Discord lounge where we all hang out and talk Chicago sports and so much more. So go to allchgo.com for the latest info on how you can join the thousands of diehards in our community. We cannot wait to connect with you on an even greater level. Fall's here. The ivy was turning a little bit orange before those last few remaining games. The air is crisp. Football's here. The Bears are here. Maybe there's a bonfire or two, but if you're like most guys, you're still putting in the work. And yeah, that means sweat. Don't let body odor sideline you. You know the feeling this game day, and your lucky jersey smelling just a little too lucky. Regular deodorant just does not cut it. That's where Mando deodorant and sweat control comes in. One stick, two jobs, stops odor and sweat before they even start. Right now, you can grab the Mando starter pack, a solid stick, a cream tube, 2 free products like mini body wash and wipes, and free shipping. And for our listeners, you can get 20% off site-wide with code CHGO at shopmando.com. That's SHOPMANDO.com. Support the show, smell great, and stay dry with Mando deodorant plus sweat control.
All right, Brendan. I suppose, if I were getting granular, if I could pick one single regret, I guess it's that Kyle Tucker didn't hit that 3-1 pitch right down the middle of the plate. But I digress. We'll get into that. We'll talk about my man Kyle. But yeah, if I were picking one thing, like, boy, is that that was hard to get over. Like, even in the moment where you're like, okay, that.
I mean, you kind of felt at that moment that
certainly felt like that. To quote the legendary Pat Hughes, that felt like a turning point in the game for sure.
Turning point. It was a
turning point. That's also
back
one
home.
Of those. Yeah, like that's one of those things. Like going into the game, if I could tell you it's going to be close, Cubs are going to have 2 runners on, and Kyle Tucker's going to get a 3-1 fastball literally down the middle of the plate, I would go, sign me up for that scenario. That sounds great. Let's roll the dice on that and see what happens. Oh, well, anyway, I want to ask you broadly before we get into a lot of the minutia of like the season and, heading to the off season and what Jed said or didn't say. If you were looking back at 2025 and you had to pick one thing, what's the most significant development on this team for this organization? And, now that we've seen it through a couple rounds in the playoffs, like what's number one in your mind as we head into this offseason?
Player-wise, Pete Crow-Armstrong, clearly Pete Crow-Armstrong. You're talking about a 5-win player in June, July. He was on pace for 10 WAR before he had that poor second half. Organizationally wide, they accomplished what you and I had talked about for many years, and that's hitting on the margins on development and depth. So the way they built their bullpen, Caleb Thielbar, getting Andrew Kittredge at the deadline, of course, Brad Keller, Daniel Palencia's progression, that boosted them and was one reason why they made it as far as they did. So player-wise, PCA, organizationally, it gives me confidence that they now have a benchmark, a reference point to look back and understand, okay, this process worked. Let's apply it to this next batch.
Yeah. That was kind of a cheat answer. I mean, you said a lot of things. I said one thing, but
I gave you one thing in each category.
If you're watching on YouTube, drop in the chat or in the comments, like would love to hear yours, like one single development from this year that you think stands out. If you're going to pick PCA, I mean, I think Cade Horton is certainly potentially another choice. I'm going to say Michael Busch though. And part of that is helped by the playoffs, sort of. But not
38
really.
home runs in total is no joke.
Well, and like, now we just have a 2-year sample of Michael Busch to look at. Obviously on this season in 2025, he puts up a 140 WRC plus, 261, 343, 523 overall slash line, 34 home runs, drives in 90 runs, 3.5 wins above replacement. And then in the playoffs, he obviously is your hottest hitter. He goes off, which it's a small sample. Sometimes playoffs are noise, but nice. There's plenty of guys where they kind of shrink come October. And boy, did Michael Busch not shrink. He shined in the playoffs, which is always just exciting that, to see that a player has that dog in him, literally, like to shine on the biggest stage.
Plus defense
against the best pitching.
With it.
Yeah. But then, like, you look at overall now, he's got 1,159 plate appearances with the Chicago Cubs, his 2 years with the Cubs. So not counting that little stint that he had in the majors previously with the Dodgers. 821 OPS, 129 WRC plus overall in those 2 years. So that even includes like the beginning of his career, all these adjustment phases that he's gone in. Like, it was a big swing in that trade, certainly. Some high potential guys in Ferris and Hope to the Dodgers. They immediately like shot up their prospect rankings. But Jed has gotten a top level first baseman for 2 years, and someone who in his full sophomore season took things to a completely different level and like puts himself in the conversation as one of the best first basemen in baseball at this point. I think that's a huge development, Brendan. I mean, certainly how you want to square PCA's development, Horton's development, like they're all great.
It's all important.
We don't necessarily have to rank them, but I do think at a premium position, and we've talked about this, post Rizzo, not a position that they immediately had answers for. And they've tried different things. Sometimes those guys come available via trade. We've seen some top first baseman move via trade. We've seen it via free agency. But to find a, relatively young, mid heading to his late 20s, cost controlled first baseman, playing this premium position, improving at defense, and putting himself in those conversations on the offensive perspective, massive. We always talk about this, like you want to yell about the money and the payroll and all this other stuff. The easiest way for that to be helped is to have cost-controlled players that are producing at a significant level. And Michael Busch in this year, I think, has really cemented himself in very serious conversations amongst first basemen in this league. And that is a huge win for Jed Hoyer. And, like I said, then to see it carry over into the playoffs, it's like,
Yeah.
okay. I mean, like when you're building a roster for the next several years, like that is a very, very serious thing that we saw from Michael Busch. So if I'm not going to say PCA or Kate Horton, I think Michael Busch, and again, not just that we saw it improve in this second year, but that it's 2 years now. You've seen this of significantly above league average production where he seems to only be getting better. That's an extremely exciting development. That would be my choice.
Overall, he's among the top guys who overproduced this year. If you just rank the top guys who outperformed their projected WAR from a hitting perspective, PCA is number one. And then you do have Michael Busch and Carson Kelly neck and neck for number two. Number one on this list, and a significant reason for the Cubs' success, is Matthew Boyd. The pitching discussions we are going to have this offseason are going to be so large in so many different options because they have a lot of work to match the value that he provided and that they may be missing because of maybe Shota's not coming back. On the bottom of this list, you have Shota. He outproduced his WAR negatively by almost 2 wins. Not good. Justin Steele missed the entire season. He did not provide the almost 3 wins he was projected to have. Justin Steele, your ace. Shota Imanaga, your number 2 starter. Porter Hodge, you're entering the year as your ace.
Yeah.
Those guys summed up to nearly 6 WAR lost. So think about this. You're entering the year, and if you were to tell me, you know what, you're getting basically no value from your ace or number 2 and your presumed closer, I would have been freaking out. The way they made that up was precisely because Matthew Boyd outproduced by nearly 2.5 WAR. Pete Crow-Armstrong outproduced by 2 WAR. Kate Horton, you just talked about, almost 2 WAR. The back end of the bullpen, Brad Keller by almost a WAR and a half. Michael Busch by 1 WAR, right? And so on and so on and so on. So that, in a way, is why I'm encouraged. The top end performers, why I'm encouraged, because that means they did identify depth pieces that are useful, and it's a benchmark. We talk about player development being good foundations, right? Because it shows that they can adapt. You can apply the same logic to the front office. You bring in new folks, new executives, new processes. They brought in someone we all know, Tyler Zombro, right? You bring in new talent, new thinking, and you did have value in the bullpen and in a signing in Matthew Boyd and Colin Ray that were inexpensive and very valuable, making up for your biggest losses.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and it's nice to see. I mean, look, you're never going to hit these things 100%, but as you're sort of alluding to, I think they're trending in the right direction in terms of getting some of those margin calls right. Certainly we look back at this offseason, the Carson Kelly signing looks great. The Colin Ray signing provided great value for you, something that a lot of people, probably you and I included, scoffed at. Like when they did it.
Very mean text messages
Yeah,
to you about
and that looked really good. I mean, even Matthew Boyd, that was one too, where like right away people were like, oh, he was injured. Like, is this their best move? Things like that, and he was in Cy Young conversations for half the season. So not everything was perfect, right? Like there's certainly some deals on there. Ryan Presley didn't work out. Justin Turner is probably like a wash, I guess. He ended up picking it up against lefties in the second half, but like probably not the way that they envisioned it.
John Birdie,
John Birdie, but like what were you expecting there? Willie Castro at the trade deadline, obviously that didn't work. But to have some of those key performers where you think back on this season where you're like, well, what if they didn't have Matthew Boyd? What if they didn't have Carson Kelly doing what he did, especially in those first couple months of that season? What if they didn't have Colin Ray to support and be there when so many of these guys got hurt and all of a sudden he's pitching every 5th day? So some of the, Brad Keller, all these guys in the bull, I mean, really the entire bullpen, basically outside of Daniel Palencia, who was acquired via trade several years ago, like almost everybody else was just a great swing. Drew Pomeranz was like a playoff ace for you, like a guy they picked up out of nowhere. The list goes on, right? Like trading, acquiring Caleb Thielbar, like proved to be a really good move. He was great all season and in the playoffs. So some really good stuff. And, we talked about it coming into the year, like, if you're not going to play in that high end pool, in terms of some pitching or some relievers, you have to be good, at identifying it and developing it on your own and bringing it into your organization and finding ways to get that value out of it. And they did a really good job of that this year. Did they do enough over the course of the offseason in the year? I guess
No.
the answer is no, right?
No.
Like they didn't win. So, but like that's also a nuanced sort of thing, right? But they did a lot of really good things. And I think that should be encouraging as we go forward, because especially with a lot of those bullpen guys, Brendan, they're going to have to do it again. It's an exercise that sort of just repeats itself on an annual basis. So
let's take our ad break here, come back. A lot more to talk about. It's got a long off season ahead of us. Okay. Hang in tight. New vehicles are in store at Ray Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, Ram, and this is your chance to score a great deal at the Drive Into Fall event. Head to Ray CDJR on Route 12 today to choose from their huge inventory of new Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram vehicles. Right now, get 0% financing for 72 months, available on new models. Plus, shop over 125 vehicles priced under $20,000. With a friendly team of brand experts, the team at Race CDJR is here to help you during each step of your car shopping journey. With Bray's Price Promise, you can shop confidently with no add-ons or hidden fees ever. The price you see is the price you pay. It is that simple. So go check out our partner today to shop one of the Chicago area's largest inventories to find the right new vehicle for you. Don't miss out on the Drive Into Fall event for huge savings on those new models. And for more info, visit Race CDJR today at Route 12 in Fox Lake or online at racecdjr.com. They've been serving the community since 1963. Man, I still think about those Cubs playoff runs, the crowd at Wrigley, the electricity in the air, every pitch feeling like life or death. There's just nothing like being there. Getting tickets, that's always been the stressful part. There's queues, there's login screens, the prices change right before you check out. A 25% spike, you know what that feels like. That's why I use Game Time. It gives the advantage back to fans. You can grab last-minute tickets fast, easy, and without the nonsense. The Game Time guarantee means your tickets are also 100% authentic. Show up on time, and you get the best price. No hidden fees. What you see is what you pay. And the zone deals, game changer. Pick your section, Game Time picks your seats, and you save big. Plus, I love following the Cubs in the app to get alerts when prices drop during the season. So take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets, NFL tickets, NHL tickets coming up. Download Game Time, create an account, use code CHGO. That's code CHGO for $20 off your first purchase. Tap to go, download Game Time today.
It's interesting, Brendan, when I think back to, it's interesting how the playoffs play out and, kind of how they're certainly their own unique beast. Because I think back to, like, during the off season, I know I said it a bunch and you and I discussed it a bunch, but like one of my biggest concerns with the team was that they did not have like proven and reliable starting pitching that you could count on from day one to day 200 if you got there, right? And we're pitching deep into October. And we talked about it, right? Like Shota, new to the league, had never done it, right? Matthew Boyd had pitched in the playoffs the year before, but was coming off of injuries, like a shortened season. Tyone, I think, had pitched in the playoffs once with the Yankees. Justin Steele hadn't made it through a full season, hadn't been healthy, and like all that stuff toward the end of the year. And so I remember vividly, like, this is my concern. Like, this is my concern. Are they going to have the juice in the tank? Are guys going to be healthy come October? And that sort of plays out, right? Like, now they didn't know that Horton would develop like that. They also didn't know he would get like a freak injury, sort of not related to the thing that they were managing very, very carefully the entire time he was up. But ultimately, like, as I said, like, certainly it would have affected those first two games in Milwaukee, but overall, like, it was the lack of runs that really is the problem. So it's like, it's one of those things where, like, I was always worried about that. And so looking back, I do feel like they didn't do enough in the offseason in the rotation. But then like as the season actually plays out and you're like watching these games, you're like, well, would this have mattered? Like, I don't know. And again, maybe it would have, right? But like, had they signed Max Fried, it doesn't put more runs on the board in game 5, right? Like, so I don't know. And then at the same time, and Jed alluded to this, like scoring in the playoffs is hard. It's not a great run scoring environment. So that to me, I still believe that about the pitching, but that's also why we talked about even when they did sign Colin Ray and when we were talking about, depth guys like Javi Assad and Jordan Wicks and all those guys, we would always, you can never have too much pitching. You're going to need it. Maybe you don't feel like you need it now, but at some point you're going to need it and you're going to be glad that you have it. So I think that's always a priority. And as we head into this offseason, I would still make it a priority. There's a lot of unknowns with this rotation going into next year. The shape guys are going to be in, their health coming back from things. And I think you would still have that same trepidation of like, okay, like, do we have guys that we can like really rely on? So that would be something that I would still be looking at in the off season, regardless of whether or not I think it was like the key to them being eliminated. I think the bigger trick to solve is the offense. And it was a good question in the press conference with Jed on Wednesday, just like, how do you do that? And he talked about the shape of the offense. Obviously, the overall production was really good. And on the whole, I think you'd be thrilled about it. But there were those periods where looking at the overall picture maybe wasn't telling the full story, at least at that specific time. If you don't retain Tucker, it's a lot to replace. I'm throwing a lot at you here, but I'm just sort of like centering my thoughts from even last offseason and like heading into this. And so I think the offense is a lot more interesting to me. Like the pitching staff, it's always the same. Just keep adding good arms. You can never have too many.
Oh, it's that simple?
Well, but it's not that simple, but it's just add as much pitching as you can. Act like you never have enough. And you just saw some of your guys fade. So try to do what you can to mitigate that. And of course, that's never guaranteed, right? Like guys like they don't make a lot of guys like John Lester at this point anymore, but just guys that like, okay, we believe if they're healthy, like this guy can grind out 162 games plus getting us through the playoffs. The offense is a trickier thing to solve and especially to mitigate exactly what Jed was talking about, like those periods where it disappears and just the overall shape of things.
He did say, he used the word signal. It's hard to find signal in those small samples of what's real and what's not real. I'm going to put this graph back up. It's rhetorical. Number one on this list for most outproduced WAR in a positive fashion is who? Matthew Boyd, right? Number one. On the very bottom is Justin Steele. Second on the bottom is Shota Imanaga. So your top 3 pitchers are the most extreme differences in projected value. That's not going to make any front office comfortable. You have to improve the pitching. Now, the argument against Boyd is he's in his mid-30s. He's older than you and I, Corey, and I can barely walk during the mornings. Justin Steele is recovering from Tommy John. He's in Mesa. He's throwing, by the way. Good to see. Shota Imanaga may not even be back with the Cubs. James Tyone's getting older as well. It might be a big ask. We're talking not just one pitcher. We're talking multiple pitchers that you have to fill because the projections for 2026, they're going to be hit or miss maybe because of those age factors and the injury factors. The offense is a little bit more narrow. It doesn't mean I'm happy about it. I share a lot of the concern that when you lose Tucker, who's going to be that middle order bat? I'm concerned, and I share a lot of concern about Seiya Suzuki's second half, even though a strong postseason. That's also going to be reflected in their projections. They have an enormous task ahead of them to not just improve the rotation. I just showed 3 extreme guys right there, but you're right. They have to find a way to stabilize that offense, because ultimately, when you and I talk about where we want this team, I don't want to be an 87 win team on paper. I don't want to be a 90 win on paper. I don't want to be a 92 win team on paper. Hear me out. Front offices may want that, right?
That's the only reason I'm making a face. It's like
that's
Jed
their
literally, they're saying
prerogative.
yeah, okay. Yeah.
That's their prerogative.
Yeah.
When I watch a season, I want to have the expectation that unless something catastrophic happens, I'm previewing an NLDS with you the second week of October. For me, the best way to ensure that happens is you're a 94-win team. Now, the front office looks at this as like, all right, well, I want to have a job in a 5-year window where we make the playoffs 3 to 4 times, maybe, mess around, get a World Series. Listen, if I were working in the front office, I'd be thinking that too. This is my entertainment. I want the 94 wins, but it's a huge ask right now, I think, to get to 94, given some of those extremes we just looked at.
Yeah, I mean, I know some people get bothered by that, right? Like Carter supposedly saying 87, Jed saying 90, Craig saying 90 or 92, whatever. I don't get worked up by that. I don't.
Can I just add one thing to that? Just
of course.
Brief aside. Listen, these are he said, she said situations. We don't know the context of that. I'm not going to come on here and make this huge hoopla over something that was paraphrased.
All I'm saying is that I wouldn't, and I'm not saying you are, I'm saying generally, like, I wouldn't take that literally. I think aiming for 90 as an organization, as like, this is what we're going for on a year-on-year basis, I don't take that to mean that they're content with that every year. I take it to mean like, that's the baseline of what you're building. And then there's going to be years based on how you performed and the contract situations that you have that you're easily able to push that to what you're talking about, 95, 96. And, again, some of this stuff is up in the air. You're potentially having to replace a pretty significant, contributor in Kyle Tucker. But like, they did have a lot go really well, and they had a lot of it go really well with not particularly expensive or, like arbitration level guys. That provides them hopefully an opportunity to push it a little bit and take a team that just won 92 games. Certainly you might lose some, right? Or you might have some regression, et cetera, and say, okay, like now we can push this a little further. Right. And so I wouldn't like, they're not like literally like, okay, 87 every year. Great. Perfect. Like it's just it's a baseline. But to be honest with you, like when I watched that press conference yesterday, Brendan, I watched the whole thing. I didn't really take much issue with it. Like I agreed with most of what he was saying. And look, I do want to say this too.
Let's be clear though. When you say you liked it, let me be clear. When I say I like it because he didn't give anything. Like he's not
sure. No, but I'm saying he didn't say anything that I was like up in arms over. I was like, yeah, fair. Right? Yeah, fair. Yeah, this is a fair answer.
Doesn't mean I loved it. Doesn't mean I liked it.
No. And look, the usual caveat here, right? Especially as we head into the offseason. Like, if you've listened to us for any amount of time, you know this. If you don't, just treat this as an evergreen thought. I want them to spend as much money as possible. I want them to be unquestionably the number one team in baseball, a juggernaut, a team that everybody else fears. And that you think like as fans and myself as a season ticket holder, I like looking at those charts where the Cubs are at the bottom of the percent of like their revenue that they put back into the baseball budget. It makes me sick, right? But at the same time, they're going to operate how they operate. If you and I came on here, Brendan, and talked as though they had a $350 million payroll, what service is that to anybody? That's not reality. It's not going to happen. So talking about how they might operate and be their best in the way they're really going to operate is not like condoning it or letting them off the hook for it. It's just what they're going to do. And we just have to like come to terms with it. But there's always this error of like, they should always be going for it. They should always have a higher standard. Like, of course. Right. So just useful caveat. Just always know that. It's always in the back of everybody's mind.
Where does he even get 87 wins, right? Where do we always get the 87 to 90 wins? There was a quote in the offseason in February where Jed Hoyer says, oh man, I think it was the Dodgers. The Dodgers are built where, a 30th percentile outcome is still pretty good. Yeah. What exactly does that mean? The one thing I will say, sometimes I can be guilty of it too. You got to simplify some of the stupid percentile stuff, some of like the different, Z-score, standard deviation. Here's what that means. If you take projected wins versus run differential wins, which is what you're trying to project, the majority of teams are going to fall within 5 wins of their expected and projected. That means if you want to ensure that your floor has a 30% chance at being a playoff contender, you need to win 87 games, because most teams, 30% of teams, will outperform their projected records by at minimum 5 wins. So if you want to be in the 70% tier that's within the 5 wins, then you aim for 87. So let me bring this back to what I want as a fan. I don't like 82. I was in Arizona in 2023 sweating my ass off over there, okay? I'm watching Hayden Wesneski take balls off the angle and Dansby Swanson's looking up in the sky. I don't like that, right? I want 94. Why do I want 94? Look at this graph right here. Look at the teams who are within 10 wins of their projection. It's about 20 teams. So for me, my air threshold, my comfort threshold is 2 standard deviations, right? My air threshold is I want to know that if my team misses their mark by 10 wins, well, I want to make the playoffs. And the way to make the playoffs is you got to win 84, 85. Okay, I want 94. 87 is not good enough for me as a fan. Every year I want 94. Is that realistic? Absolutely not. But the goal, the standard for me is at minimum 94. And you talk year in, year out about achieving 94. You aggressively go for 94. Make it clear to fans that is the standard. And again, if you want to critique how we're being communicated with by the front office and them, it's that they don't make that clear in a way that Theo made you feel like that was.
I agree with you. And I think Jed did allude to it a little bit, maybe not like directly, but I think, part of building a better team and like the priority on winning the division, getting a bye, all that other stuff, it plays a big role. I mean, it would be impossible to sit here and say that things potentially don't play out differently if the Cubs have a bye and are only playing at home. Like, it's very easy to say that, and it's got to be frustrating. It is as a fan. I'm sure as an organization it is. Like, they beat the Brewers in the season series. And they had a very good season, but nobody else could beat the Brewers. And the Brewers went on an insane run. And so you don't win the division. Like, that's something that you should be aiming to avoid. It's not that easy to anticipate exactly what your division is going to look like, but that's the risk. And I'm not saying the Cubs are feeling this, but like across baseball, that's the risk with like, you can sneak into the playoffs with, sometimes a mid, or low 80s win total and get into that wild card round. But there is a real significant value of not playing in that 3-game series and also getting the opportunity to start the NLDS at home.
Is it worth going over the first tier, the luxury tax, paying the taxes and so on and so on? We see it play out that it's not, right?
It's not worth it to do?
They haven't operated like that.
Oh,
so
sure.
Yeah. It's not. And that is something I think we need to acknowledge, that it's not worth your buy talk, everything you're talking about. It's valuable. It's just not enough signal to justify the risk and what they spend at this point. Yeah. So this is what they want to do.
Yeah. I just think that 2025 is a lesson in like, there's danger in that. Like, another team can kind of take that from you, and then you're left having to survive a wild card series and, hope that you can piece everything together. So
they enter the year with the 83 win team projection. Like, again, if you want to jump to 94, 95, oh my God, like you had to get 3 Kyle Tuckers in the offseason.
Yeah.
It just wasn't there for him.
Yeah. But is it there this offseason? I think it's certainly a much more readily available opportunity. I will say the offense is a tricky one, right? Because you do have a lot of players locked into positions. Now, certainly you can address some of these, but some of these guys have no trade clauses, and some of them I don't really know what you would gain by moving them other than just to shuffle things for the sake of shuffling them. Nico at second, Michael Busch at first, Dansby at short. I'm talking about guys that are locked into playing, not guys that are moving. I don't know why you're looking at me like
I got
that.
a little confused for a second over there.
Kelly, Amaya, probably your catching tandem, assuming, Miguel is able to, continue rehabbing and get healthy this offseason. Hap, PCA, Seiya, either in right or DH, whatever. I thought he looked fine in right field.
Ballesteros, known Casey at DH.
Yeah.
Here we come.
So I think like early questions without like significant movement, right? Or trading guys that you maybe wouldn't expect to be traded are exactly as first you just alluded. Do they have a vision for Ballesteros and guys like Casey? Do they make an effort to have a spot for them? Do they commit to a spot for them? Do they continue committing to Matt Shaw? He obviously played excellent defense, had a really good second half at the plate overall. Obviously, one of your former top prospects. But on the whole, certainly throughout the entire season, the production at third base was not what you wanted it to be. But assuming, especially because he was so good on defense, that is the direction that they decide to go, doesn't leave that much room for adjustments unless you're shipping guys out and like really kind of trying to change things. The key, of course, is one Kyle Tucker. And it became a much more interesting conversation in the second half of the season than I had anticipated, Brendan. I'll say this, right? I don't expect him to be back. I never really did, just given the circumstance and how this team has operated. I understand. I think some of the discourse, though, around that decision is very strange, right? Like he was pretty blatantly playing through stuff that affected his performance. And that part I share in some of the concern, and it's not something that I had felt in the beginning portion of the season. But you and I talked about it even when he first injured that hand and this first kind of started. I mentioned like this is giving me a little bit of a Chris Bryant vibe, that like a little tweak, a little nagging thing, and all of a sudden he's just out of whack. And we talked about that, how some guys, their mechanics, their flow, everything, it's so finely tuned that for whatever reason, any little thing throws it off and they're not the same guy. And if you're going to throw, whatever, $300 million at someone, you'd probably like that not to be the case, right? But at the same time, like when I'm looking around at some of this discourse, man, like I do think there's a decent segment of the fan base. Like, what did he end up with? Like an 850 OPS, like that's not easy to replace, 5 wins or whatever he ended up being. Like that is not a simple thing to replace. And his on base ability, even when he was not going at his best, like that it's a great skill, and it did add something to this lineup. And when he was healthy, this lineup was one of the best in baseball. So to me, I keep seeing it as somewhat of a simple decision to parts of the fan base because they're frustrated with his second half and his playoff performance. And like, I'm not naive to that, but it is a hole to replace. And if you are immediately expecting, Moises Ballesteros or Owen Casey to come in and put up even the numbers Kyle Tucker put up in what he would consider a down season, I'll jump right ahead of it and just say that's not going to happen. Maybe eventually in their career, but like as in a first year, just turning over that job and expecting them to eat 4.5 wins above replacement, like that is really wishful thinking and just not something that happens very often.
Seiya Suzuki finished the year with a 338 weighted on base average. He missed his mark by projected WAR by nearly 1. He would be the everyday right fielder if the season were to start today. We saw some of the defensive hiccups at times, the peculiar drops, lost in the lights, lost in the sun, and so on. He would be your starting right fielder. Then you just pointed out, okay, well, what about Ballesteros? What about Owen Casey? you're losing projections in the range of probably, I would say, 3 WAR right there. So you would have to make up 3 wins somehow. That is really, really difficult to do. And on the market, you're paying, $20+ million to do that. Then you start looking at, okay, well, who's out there? Cody Bellinger, Kyle Schwarber, those guys. Well, Bellinger is a weird profile too. He was in fact traded because he wanted more consistency, not just a year ago. Kyle Schwarber's a DH first guy. I thought we already have that with Ballesteros. Kyle Schwarber's going to be 33 years old. I see those gray hairs coming in the facial hair, right? Even though he has 55 home runs, whatever it is. Do you want to spend the money on that? There's pushback to all of this with Kyle Tucker.
Bregman out there too again.
Of course. Then how do we weigh Matt Shaw's defensive value and so on? How do we weigh perhaps he takes the next step like he did in the second half for a full season, similar to what we saw for the majority of the year in Pete Crow-Armstrong, right? All of these are really nuanced discussions. The best path forward is you consolidate everything in. Okay, the floor is this, the ceiling is this. Kyle Tucker, he hit basically where he was supposed to be, and the floor is really high to begin with. That was a luxury. Having Seiya be a 338 guy, struggle that second half, was a luxury because Kyle Tucker front-loaded the hell out of that value, right? Those guys are so difficult to get. I don't know where they're going to get that. Nothing's obvious at this point.
Yeah, I mean it's tricky. I understand, like early in the year, I would have, I think obviously so much of that discourse was Kyle Tucker wants $500 million, give him $500 million. And, again, like I saw the second half just the same as you guys. And I do think it's fair to ask, like, okay, like as he gets older, enters his 30s, like, are these nagging injuries going to pop up more? Like they do for a lot of guys. It's not his fault. It's not a unique thing even, but you saw it, right? And you can see where the front office would be thinking like, okay, like if we do sign this contract, like which version are we getting? Are we getting the, mid 900s OPS guy? Or are we getting like the mid 800s OPS guy? And for part of that, this summer, it was not even that high, but I remain hopeful that they bring him back. I think he's a great player, and it's just not easy to replace. Now, do I expect them to do it? No. I expect, some other team to offer something that the Cubs aren't going to entertain. But you have to add to the offense either way. And Jed said this in the press conference. I think it was Sahadev Sharma who asked the question, like, would you plan to replace that internally? Would it have to be an external thing? And of course, Jed can't really answer that because he can't get into too many specifics. But I think you have to add in a significant way to this offense. It doesn't mean
to add outside the organization
a ton of players, but
yeah,
like you can't lose Tucker and just how would that make you better? Like, again, it's just putting, I believe in guys like Ballesteros. I'm excited for the future of him and Owen Casey, like, but that's not a strategy. Like, especially as so many people are saying the offense was too inconsistent and closer to league average in that second half. Like, how is replacing Kyle Tucker with a bunch of rookies going to help that? Right. So I don't think they need 10 guys on this offense. Overall, it was a good offense. But I do think you're going to have to replace that production and maybe not necessarily go over that. But I do think, like, again, taking another look at that bench and those platoon roles and things like that and making smart decisions there.
I don't want that.
What?
I want 94 wins entering the year.
I understand that. I understand that. But I'm saying, like, I do think a little more, call it stability. I know, like, I saw it, and someone asked Jed this too in the press conference, like, should you just make half the team out of Nico Hoerners, right? And I don't think the answer to that is yes. Well, sort of it's yes, right? But, like, eventually, like, a team with that profile would have its own set of problems that people would get sick of eventually. But I do think, like, finding guys that are a little more reliable in terms of this team has a lot of guys that are fairly boom or bust. Overall on the year, their production is really good, but their lows can be pretty low. And we saw it a little bit with this team that they happened kind of at the same time. But, and I'm assuming this is what you're going to say, it's not easy to do that. Like, there's not a lot of guys like Nico Hoerner, and we just live in a day and age where, like, you know, if Kyle Schwarber is the number one person people like, it's what, 220? Like, I can already envision the outright panic when he's going through those games where he's not hitting the home run.
All right, we're gonna go overtime.
We're gonna go to
like
overtime if you're yeah. Stick with us here.
But the profile these hitters have, they had huge lows, right? They had huge highs. All of that baked in. That's why Jed was talking about shapes. Also, too, Seiya went on an absolute heater in the playoffs with a putrid weeks preceding that. You can't predict that.
It's hard. Yeah.
Had two of your most impactful hits in elimination games in both the wild card series and in the DS. It's hard to predict. If you want to be like, you know, really safe, you get an extra Tucker. You get two Tuckers, right? Not just one Tucker, you get two Tuckers, but you're not going to get that. This is who the Cubs are. And if you want to see a major shakeup, you're going to have to move some of those guys around. You're going to have to move around maybe someone with a no trade clause if you really want to shake this up and go crazy.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, so look, like early, it's very early, right? Like we're not even at, like, you know, the non-tenders and all these other things. There's a lot of steps before we really get into like the meat of this offseason. We didn't even touch on the Shota thing, which has become somewhat complicated, I think, just because if you pick up the team option, it turns into a 3-year deal for $57 million with a no trade clause, which, like, is at least something to consider. Like, unless the budget is open and the checkbook is flying, like, unfortunately, you have to consider every dollar for this team, whether we like it or not. But I would say, yeah, like a strong starting pitcher, always adding to the bullpen. I'm never a fan of like throwing big money at that. But I think if you can find ways to add actual like presence and stability, not guys like Ryan Presley, who you're like squinting to try to see if you can make them good again, I would support that.
You want Tanner Scott?
No, that's like top level. I'm just saying, like, always adding to the bullpen. Like, you can't always expect to hit on every one of your Brad Kellers and Drew Pomeranzes and things like that. But, you know, maybe they have the formula figured out and they don't need to do that. But
the Nick, the creator, brought up a good comment. He said, quote, "I know they said they found some movement issues with Shota that happened after his IL stint. Can they fix it if they pick up his option?" Yeah, if I had to guess what the order of operations are with Shota, it's number one, the options being declined. So they're likely, I think, not going to pay Shota 3 years of $57 million. Then the ball goes to Shota's court. Does Shota say, okay, I'll take the $15 million for next year. I'll get the $30 million guarantee for 2 years. Or do I risk the Cubs giving me a qualifying offer or not, reject the qualifying offer, enter free agency with a draft pick attached, and try to either get more than $22 million annual average value or more than $30 million in a 2-year period? Shota had a 4.9 FIP. He's 32, 33 years old. He's aging. I think what's going to happen is the Cubs are going to decline that 357. Shota's going to get the $15 million. They may work something out. Or, you know, if Shota does end up picking free agency, the Cubs will just try to get him back on a cheaper rates, or they just
qualifying offer, can you?
They can use the qualifying offer, but if they don't even give him a qualifying offer because they don't want to do $22 million, I could see them just moving on and using it elsewhere.
And I think part of this, you know, you're going to have to defer to them, right? Like, he dealt with some injuries. Like, they're going to have to evaluate, do they think that he fully recovered from those things? Do they think that, come March or April of next year, he'll have, recovered differently? Did that affect the way that he was pitching? Things like that. And, we just can't answer that, right? Like,
He
we
had
don't
too much
have,
run on his pitches. So
yeah,
that's what it was. And
we
so
don't,
that's
we
the
just
reason.
don't have some of the full picture. But like I said, I think when we're talking about this team, and this goes along with like the caveat that I dropped, like, if they're not going to have an open checkbook, like, you have to comb over every dollar, because ultimately we've seen this come the trade deadline a couple years in a row. Like, they're really close to certain thresholds that they are treating as absolutes. And so every little signing or dollar here or there, it really does matter. And I think as you're going forward here, the question isn't like, you don't want to overreact necessarily to a down, couple months, or, some playoff performances from Shota. But at the same time, you have to ask yourself, like, do you want to be paying this guy $19 million a year for the next 3 years without the ability to move him? And in a situation where money may be tight, you have other guys maybe that you want to give opportunities to in the rotation. I don't think that's like a slam dunk of a thing. I would
It's a
not upset if Shota is a part of this team, right? If they evaluate that he can recover and pitch better and they can fix some of these things, great, right? He's been a great player for the Cubs. It's been a great deal that they've signed, but now you're talking about 3 years into the future, like almost thinking of this like as if he was a free agent and this is what the cost was. Like, would you want them to do it? Or would you want them to put that money elsewhere? Is it better served than other things? That's what they're going to have to evaluate. The nature of the contract option turns this into a bigger, not so simple discussion. So yeah, I mean, that's like the preemptive shopping list for me. And again, look, we're especially as the rotation is concerned, we're very far away from. We do this all the time, but the 2016 rotation
that won the
series.
World
Yeah.
Series. Oh God.
You walked into spring training, you walk into that season basically with 5 guys, and they pitch every game. They pitch every game in the playoffs. Like, you just didn't really have to do a lot of thinking, right? Occasionally guys are hurt, and you have to throw the late Brian Mattes out there and things happen. But otherwise, you're just bookmarking these guys to be there
I
every.
don't know. The Dodgers are doing that as I watch these games right now.
And our guy Niren in the chat was talking about that. Like, they're their own beast. Like, as you said, like, I would like the Cubs to operate that way. I would like them to have some of the luxuries that the Dodgers have. They're able to weather a storm where Blake Snell or Tyler Glasnow aren't pitching for weeks or months at a time, and they still make the playoffs. And oh, look who's healthy now and ready to carry them through the
Our
playoffs. If
4
it isn't
aces.
a perfectly rested Blake Snell, isn't that nice?
Tyler Glasnow.
What a luxury that is. Like, that's tough to get to. I would love for the Cubs to get there, but they just don't operate that way. And that's one of those things. It development is a big part of it, but like, the money obviously helps. Like, if you're able to weather those storms and still make the playoffs while giving guys rest. And look, it was a luxury that you can also create that luxury just by winning, right? Like, the Cubs in 2016 have such a huge lead in the division that they're able to think a little more forward to the playoffs. How much do we want to ride some of these guys? Do we want to start lowering their pitch count or being careful with some of these relievers? Like, do we really need to sell out to win this game on September 12th against the Reds when we have a 17-game lead in the division? Probably not. We can probably be thinking ahead to, they didn't know it at the time, but like the Giants in the NLDS, we don't really need to care about this game. But how do you predict that, right? Like, Cubs had a great season. The Brewers had a better one. So you don't have that luxury. You're fighting till the very end to secure home field in the wild card and to make sure you're in the playoffs. So building in those luxuries is very hard. They're not going to operate like the Dodgers, and, year in and year out, you kind of have to see if you're afforded that luxury to kind of treat making the playoffs and winning the division as somewhat of an afterthought because you lock it up. But yeah, it would be nice, but getting to the point I was making, like, they don't build rotations like that anymore. And you're going to go into this year, I think, even right now, even if you bring back Shota, right? Like on the 1 year option or whatever it is, you have a lot of guys. Like the ceiling is really interesting with some of those guys. If Justin Steele is healthy and he can make it and be there for you, and Cade Horton continues this development and is able to do it, and Matthew Boyd takes this offseason and is able to put this together for a full season, like you can see the vision and you can see, like, certainly, like, yeah, the ceiling is there, but there's a lot of ifs there. There's a lot of volatility there. And if you can find a way to improve that group, raise the floor of that group, and just mitigate some of the potential risk. Pitching always comes with risk. You could get a guy who's been the most durable player for the last 10 years, and all of a sudden he feels something in the elbow, the second you sign him. You can never guarantee these things. But I think that's one of the priorities for me in this rotation, in this offseason.
Well, there's a lot of arms too. There's middle tier arms. Dylan Cease jumps out. We have Michael King in free agency. You want even a more riskier flyer, Chris Paddock. A lot of guys are available where you can look at like, okay, the stuff plays up. I see the negatives. I see the recency. I see some of the injuries, but the stuff plays up, and the Cubs do have a track record of identifying recently those guys.
Yeah. When I liked our guy Jim Cook in the chat, talking about like former Cubs. I think, like, is there a narrative offseason that we could just build, right? Like they sign Schwarber, they sign Dylan Cease. What are some, are there more of these? Like, just, I want all of the narratives back with the Cubs. Then we can just, not only can we relitigate those signings specifically, but then the trades in the first place, So not
Mark
only
Dreyer becomes GM.
Yeah, like not only can we talk about the decision to non-tender Schwarber several years ago, but then we can get angry again about the contract they give him now.
Let's go. It's just a never-ending cycle.
Yeah, there's got to be more guys. But yeah, look, like I think they're in a good position. With
Eloy at DH.
Yeah, there's got to be more that we can accomplish here to just make this a big narrative mess. I think they're in a good position, right? You had a lot of significant developments. We'll see again, like what kind of run they want to give these guys. Again, like, is third base Matt Shaw's position? Like, you see some of those Bregman rumblings. Like, would Bregman come in? Would they use Shaw in a super utility role? That's going to be the organization's call. Like, or are they looking at this as like, no, Matt Shaw's the third baseman. He had a really nice rookie year. Like, we're going to let him do what PCA did and take that next jump, or what Michael Busch did and take that, big jump. But Kyle Tucker, a big hole to replace if you don't replace him, even in, again, what, he would consider a down year for himself. That's not an easy hole to replace. And the ceiling that you got from the first couple months is even more difficult to replace. It's not tough. Impossible.
It's a tough ask.
What you got in those first few months is extremely difficult to replace. And it was a large part of the reason, even though they played closer to 500 ball for the last couple months. Well, when you are knocking teams around for the first couple, that's okay. You've built in a bit of a cushion to continue staying at that level. And if Kyle Tucker's not there, you better hope that you get another 2,000 OPS month and a half from Carson Kelly, to buoy that, because otherwise, where's that coming from, right? So that's a huge question, but the foundation looks good. And yeah, pitching. You can never have too much pitching. I think load it up.
This is the most fragile the pitching from a top shelf perspective has been in my recent memory since entering 23, I think, in terms of projections. So we have a lot of high ceiling guys. So we had guys with track records from 23 as well. But listing off those top three guys, Boyd, Shota, Steele, uncertainty is the theme.
I mean, even Cade.
Like, so
And that's, of course, not to doubt him, but like acknowledging
no,
there's
no,
at
no, no,
least,
no.
some uncertainty
It's
there.
baked into the risk. It's
Yeah.
how the dollars will be spent because of that risk. It's not dampening the ceiling. I saw Kate Horn. He reminded me of my favorite pitchers. Matthew Boyd looked incredible. Justin Steele, I love the guy. Shota Imanaga, that fastball, when it's riding, it is one of the better fastballs, and that split to go with it. I love those guys, but when you're trying to map out where the dollars are going to go, how the puzzle is going to be pieced together, there's risk in those profiles that have to be properly contextualized. And there may be more risk in that profile than there is in the offensive profile. It's going to be fascinating to how this front office goes about even spending, let's say, $50 million in that remaining budget, whether it will be spread out in the pitching side or maybe consolidated into one or two particular players on the offense. If I had to guess, we'll be pitching.
I would think so too.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, again, like I think there's just so much on this offense that it doesn't necessarily have to be set in stone, but you do have a decent number of guys that have no trade clauses. You have guys that their contracts are expiring, which Jed talked about. Like a lot of that was by design, especially heading before this lockout, like timing certain guys' timelines together, like, and things like that. So it's not that easy to move. I know so many people like, think of some of the more volatile profiles or inconsistent profiles. Like, I don't know that I would expect coming out of this offseason for that to like be solved. Like if you're frustrated this past season from some of the, wild peaks and valleys of like Ian Happ, or you still have not come to terms with like who Dansby Swanson is as a hitter, like
it's baked in.
When it's just like you're going to deal with it again. Like it's not going to, I don't think a lot of this is going to change in such a significant way. It's going to be what they add around these things and, looking again to like, what does this next chapter for PCA look like? How does he put this together?
The player development will be interesting because just mapping out how the offseason worked for PCA, he came into opening day spring training a little bit more crouch, a little bit more athletic. Last second half, he had a leg kick. Leg kick was no longer there. A lot of changes from PCA. You're seeing all the iterations of Matt Shaw. I will be fascinated to see what he looks like on day one. If a lot of the openness stance changes we've seen carry over and so on. For Miguel Amaya, a lot of the changes you saw in the second half did carry over to opening day. For Pete Crow-Armstrong, they did not, but it's part of that evolution process. And it's why Dustin Kelly has been so productive, because he's helping those guys go through those valleys and get to the point where they are producing above league average.
Yeah. I think ultimately, again, like there's not a lot of wiggle room like on the offensive side, but there are decisions that they can make. Like I said, how much runway do they give to younger guys? How many younger guys do they give them to? Right. And, do they add someone significant? If they don't retain Tucker, how do they replace that production? How do they replicate that production? Who does it come from? And then just, adding as much pitching as possible. But I think the hope for this offseason, right? Like, I don't think we need to, like operate with like delusions of grandeur, right? Like, I don't think we need to sit here and expect them to, well, they should bring back Tucker and they should sign Pete Alonso and Alex Bregman, like, or things like that, right? But I think the hope is that you had a really good season, and the way it plays out in the second half, in the playoffs, it gives you some insight into what would you have changed? What do you need to prepare for next time? And there's things in baseball that you can't prepare for. You can't always be prepared for. There's not always a great answer to how do we hit better in the playoffs when we're only facing the best pitchers the other team has to offer and 5 different relievers throwing 103 with a 95-mile-an-hour slider. It's not to be defeatist, but it's like there's not always a great answer to that, right? But it does give you some lesson like, okay, did we have enough starting pitching? Were we prepared for some of these guys to be fatigued? Did we have enough in the bullpen to lean on the guys we needed to lean on, and handle all of the different tough hitters that we faced in these playoffs. And then, from that offensive perspective, like, again, it's not an easy thing to solve, but like, all right, in the playoffs, we struggled at times with certain types of pitchers. We struggled to string these runs together, string these innings together, or get those big hits. It's not easy. There's not like let's go sign the guy who hits with runners in scoring position in the playoffs. That'll solve all our problems. Like, it's not that simple, right? But
it's also not worth, I hate to say it, but talking about that at that granularity is not worth it.
I agree with
the
you.
front office is saying there's no signal there.
Yeah, I'm
You've
just
been
talking about
this
like
for
what the
decades.
fan sentiments are and what everybody's thinking. But yeah, like, I think the hope in this offseason is that this is a jumping off point, right? This was a good season. You saw a lot of really strong developments, a lot of things that really bode well for the health of this organization going forward. And if you attack this offseason in a way to kind of check some of those blind spots, improve some of those areas, and strengthen the things that maybe you felt were some slight shortcomings in this past year, maybe you take a 92 win team to a 95 win team, 97 win team. And, we're having a different discussion at this time next year, having won the division and feeling stronger about this group going into the playoffs.
All right.
That's the hope. Let's see what happens. I look forward to an off season of, like, I don't know if it's the next step, but at some point we get our annual letter full of lies from Tom, delivered in our email. So I always look forward to that. His spin on things and, why everybody's tickets are more expensive and stuff like that. So always look forward to that. It's always a joy. And then we'll get into it after the World Series. They're going to make some non-tender decisions. We'll get into arbitration. We'll see what those raises look like, qualifying offers, all that stuff. And then it's on Jed and Co. to improve on things. I think, you heard it from them. Like, this was a good season, a successful season, one that they feel proud of. But ultimately, they want to win the division. They want to be playing deeper into October, and everybody's fawning over it. But everybody wants more of playing in front of the fans at Wrigley Field in the playoffs. And so do we. So we will be here with you throughout the offseason. We'll talk about it, and we will go through the procedure of how they take this team from an NLDS loss to hopefully that next step come 2026. So appreciate you tuning in. Appreciate you sticking with us all season. And it's the way baseball works. It never stops. We just roll into the next thing. So as quickly as we were talking about the playoffs and the Padres and the Brewers, here we are. We're back in free agency, and we're looking ahead to March of 2026, where the Cubs will begin anew and hopefully improve the result. So let's hope this is the start of a nice run here and things to come. But we'll guide you through the offseason to see how Jed and Carter Hawkins and company take us there. So thank you for tuning in. We'll talk to you again next week. And as always, go Cubs.
We all silly like the mayor.